Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Code Snippets. My name is Milan Surnavne. Today we'll be looking into controller advice. So in layman terms, controller advice is like a catch block that handles all the exceptions thrown in that particular JVM. Now what's the purpose of try-catch block? A try-catch block is used to ensure that a program does not terminate abruptly in case of an exception. It is basically a proper mechanism provided to handle all of the exceptions that are raised or that might be raised in our application. A typical method of exception handling is to encapsulate the dubious code within a try block, catch the exceptions using a catch block, and then maybe have a finally method, but we are not really looking into the finally method here. So what's the problem with try catch block? Let us say that we have a controller and it has multiple methods such as get, update, get all, add, remove, and many others we really can't say. And out of these n number of methods, some of them throw exceptions. Let's say 5 of them throw exceptions. So what we'll be essentially doing is adding a try block followed by a catch block 5 times. This results in a lot of boilerplate code. So tomorrow, if let's say the type of I were to change how the exceptions are handled, I'll have to go at all the 5 different methods, change the code there, and then the code maintenance would be complete. This is very tedious. Also, while updating the code, a programmer might miss making changes everywhere. This would result in non-uniform responses for the same exceptions, and in a more severe case, the entire application there may be a client depending on the response, and the application for the client might crash. You never know. So that's where the controller advice comes in. Oh, and another disadvantage of using the try-catch block is, let's say that for a happy workflow, I return a POJO, but when an exception is raised, I do not want to return I do not want to return that POJO. I cannot return null. If I just rethrow the exception from catch, the client would see HTTP status 500 with the message internal server error and the name of the exception, which is really not very informative. Of course, there is a workaround for this. What we can do is, in the catch, we can change the return type of the method to string instead of the POJO. Now, in the catch block, you take the necessary information, you convert that JSON into a JSON string, and then you return that JSON string as the response. But again, that's a very ugly way of doing it. So what we're going to do is we have a controller advice. A controller advice is a class annotated with controller advice or REST controller advice. It is one single class for handling all of the exceptions. Whenever an exception is raised in your controller, the control comes to the exception handling method mentioned within the controller advice. So since the control has been transferred, you can send a different response. You can have a different return type. There are two places where the exception handling method can be written. The first place is you write the exception handling method within the same controller and then repeat it in every controller wherever that exception is raised, resulting again in the boilerplate which we were trying to avoid in the first place. The second way is to have a dedicated class for handling all of these exceptions. Now, these classes can operate on different controllers depending on, well, you can set a controller advice class for all of the controllers in that JVM or for that application, or you can set it for all the controllers in a particular package, or you can have a controller advice only for a few specific controllers. And finally, you can have a controller advice for classes with only a particular annotation. There are two levels of precedence that have been provided for controller advice and REST controller advices as well, of course. The first level is the lowest precedence, which is the lower precedence level, and the highest precedence, which is the higher precedence level, and this is rhetorical. The exception handling methods can also be written in the same controller class. Yes, we know that now. But yes, if there is, okay, don't restart it now. Yeah. So, in case you have written an exception handling method in your controller class and in the controller advice as well. In this case, the method written in your controller would be executed. That would be given a preference. Now, there are a few unexpected behaviors when it comes to controller advice. The first one, let's say you have two different controller advices handling the same exception. Like, for example, let's take a custom exception, account not found exception. I have two different controller advices handling account not found exceptions at the same precedence level and at a global level. In this case, you never know it would hit which controller advice. Another ambiguity is that if an exception is handled across different level of advices, you have no way of telling which controller advice it would go to. But fancy this one. If you have two methods written within the same controller, handling the same exception, the exception is not handled at all. Because the container could not resolve the ambiguity in this case, it does not handle the exception at all and it throws a 500 internal server error. In this playlist, we'll take a look at creating a controller, throwing an exception, handling the exception within the same controller through the different class for specific classes across the package at a global level using annotations, and finally at all the unexpected behaviors of the controller advice. Thank you.